Once you've got your music on the page, it may need a little tidying up. The defaults are pretty good, and you already know how to change them. If you're in SE or Elements, you're limited to what you can do in the Write Mode Properties panel. But bear in mind that's actually a fair amount. You can do things like flipping slurs and tuplets using F. And note that things like tuplet brackets are actually a Write Mode property, despite the fact they look like a graphical decision. So you can turn them on and off from here. You could lose the number too. And of course, if you've got something like a hairpin that's the wrong length, you can alter that semantically. I'll get onto these linked dynamics in a sec. But for Dorico Pro users, if you want to tweak stuff graphically, the place to do that is in Engrave Mode, and specifically the graphic editing tool in the left panel. There are various tools here. So if you wanted to tuck this dynamic a bit closer to the staff, you could grab it and drag it, or you can use Alt Up, Alt Down, Alt Left, Alt Right, to adjust by small increments, and you'll see the Start Offset property changing as I do this. Add Command or Control on Windows and you'll get larger increments. And if you add Shift, so that's Command-Shift-Opt arrows, or Control-Shift-Alt and the arrows, you'll get really tiny increments. And you can type whatever you like into these properties. If you type a decimal, it'll automatically convert to a fraction. Objects like slurs and hairpins have multiple handles, the little squares that you can drag or nudge. And once you've got the object selected, you can hit Tab to cycle around the various handles. Some people find it helpful to have all the handles shown all the time in Engrave Mode, which you can do from the Engrave menu, either individually or all of them. By the way, these values for where things have moved are fractions of spaces, where a space is the gap between two lines of the staff. So if later on you change your staff size, which is the rastral size, or your space size, all of these measurements get scaled accordingly. And if you need to reset the positions of things, you can do that from Edit Reset Position, which as you can see moved the start of this back, or by switching the properties off. And Edit Reset Appearance turns all the other properties off. Depending on preferences and how you input dynamics, they may be linked like this, vertically, or grouped horizontally. Dorico tells you this in blue when you select a linked or grouped dynamic. You can only switch linking and grouping on and off in Write Mode, so you may find that while it was helpful to have dynamics linked or grouped while you were writing or arranging, it's less helpful when you want to make some micro adjustment in Engrave Mode. Grouped ones generally aren't a problem, but if I grab this linked one and drag it, you'll see all four of these are going to move. So to ungroup or unlink, you need to switch back to Write Mode, right-click or go to the Edit menu, Dynamics, Unlink. That way, when you go back to Engrave Mode, you'll be able to move just this one by itself. If you want to align ungrouped dynamics in Engrave Mode, there's a separate Align Dynamics function, and unlike grouping, this is layout specific. Now, when I talk about moving graphically rather than semantically, what I mean is that if I grab, I don't like these handles. What I mean is, if I grab this dynamic in Engrave Mode and I drag it over to the right, it's still attached to the previous note. You can see from the attachment line, which means that it's still going to affect playback from the previous note. And if I've got my Set Local Properties switch set to locally, it's still going to be attached to the previous note in the part layout. The other thing is, if I drag it down to a different staff, again, the attachment line shows me it's still attached to the viola, and so even if I print out a set of parts without looking at them, it's still going to show up in the viola part, not the cello part. If you want to move a dynamic to a different note or to a different staff, you really need to do that in Write Mode. And by the way, the developers have made moving something to a different staff intentionally difficult. You'd need to use the Move to Staff Above or Below function. And this is really about making it harder for you to make mistakes. So that's moving objects graphically versus moving objects semantically.